Hello, I'm Hugh Coakley from the Guildford Dragon News. We are hopefully emerging out of the corona crisis now, but the climate crisis hasn't gone away while we've been locked down. We have to move towards zero carbon emissions as soon as we can to limit global warming. Part of the net zero story has to be stopping our use of fossil fuels for our energy needs and a move towards renewable forms of energy. And that's what we'll be discussing today in our interview with Cllr Jan Harwood, who is leading on climate change for Guildford Borough Council. Welcome, Jan, and thank you very much for agreeing to be interviewed by the Guildford Dragon News.
Thank you for having me.
Well, firstly, Jan, can we put things in context a little bit? Guildford Borough passed a motion nearly 12 months ago now in July 2019 to declare a climate emergency and to commit to becoming a net carbon neutral borough by 2030. What's been happening since at the council to make this a reality, and are we on target to be net zero by 2030?
Well, that's a big question. The short answer is that yes, the council is on track to becoming carbon neutral by the 2030 date based on its own activities. The important thing to understand here is that borough council activities only account for 1% of total emissions out of this borough. So whilst it's very important that we take care of our own duties first and make ourselves carbon neutral as a council, there is a much bigger picture here. And the whole borough becoming carbon neutral is a long way away, as there's so many partners involved. And that really is the next conversation. And that's some of the stuff I want to be focusing on, is how do we extend this further than the council? How do we get the buy-in of the larger community, both business and our residents, to achieve the ultimate target of neutrality?
Okay. So I understand that you are now the chair of the Climate Change Innovations Board. Am I right in saying that?
That is correct, yes.
Okay, congratulations on that.
Thank you. I'm collecting these now.
Yeah, well, you're obviously a very talented person. So is that going to be driving towards just Guildford boroughs, the councils, or the broader borough? You know, and you're going to have a plan within 12 months, I think. Have you got that plan in place?
Well, that's currently what I'm really focusing in on. As you can appreciate, this is really a fairly new portfolio within Guildford Borough. And without getting too political, I think the best time for action, this is a common thing, best time for action was 20 years ago. The next best time for action is now. So, there's a certain amount of catch up to be done. And the quantity of work that we need to do to understand where we are, never mind how we get to where we want to be, is quite significant. But that's absolutely right, that we will be focusing as a board on community engagement and finding partners to achieve that. But I think it goes much further than just Guildford. I'm looking at ways of working with our immediate neighbour boroughs, because it's very easy to consider Guildford as a bubble and only look internally. But the reality is this problem spans across the entire globe. It's not a local issue, it's a global issue. And we need partners in every direction to help achieve that. And that's kind of what we're focusing on, is building a team of people to start tackling some of the larger issues.
I don't want to dwell on this because we want to talk about renewable energy, but it does seem one of the things that was said by the Climate Change Innovations Board, which seemed to have quite a bit of power, was that you would have a plan in 12 months.
Yes.
I know there's been a bit of an interruption, but do you have a plan now, 12 months later?
We are creating that, and I'm hoping to share something with the wider public soon.
Soon being what? Soon being a 6 months soon, or a 2 months?
No, sooner than that.
Okay.
Sooner than that, I'm hoping.
Okay. Well, okay. As I say, we won't dwell on that then. So, turning to renewable energy projects specifically, what projects are the council doing in the borough now?
So we've had a number of schemes running for some time now over the last 4 or 5 years. So we manage a large number of housing units, about 5,000, and we've been installing air source heat pumps, which are much more energy efficient. We've been installing LED lights, solar panels where we can. We have a couple of major solar installations going up on two of our buildings, car parks in both cases, I believe. We have insulation upgrades, and we do boiler replacements. So we look at our portfolio as a whole, and we try and make efficiency upgrades wherever possible. To date, we've installed 170 air source heat pumps in our buildings. And these are just, I mean, up to significant cost savings, up to between 30 and 50% savings to the residents that occupy these buildings. So there's a no-brainer, really. And there is some government subsidy to help with this. There's a renewable heat incentive. So even if you don't live in one of our properties, residents have a means of getting access to this, which I believe you've done, Hugh, to access this incentive and this fund to help you replace old technology with greener, more sustainable technology. So this is something we're going to keep driving forward, hopefully.
Okay, it sounds 170 air source heat pumps in an estate of 5,000.
5,000, yeah.
Actually sounds quite limited. I mean, do you agree it's limited?
I do. I completely agree. But it's, we're talking about a team that are going out and handling this, and that there's only so much capacity. What we really need is greater public buy-in. Instead of the council necessarily looking at every opportunity, we need everyone to pull in and do their bit in a way. In terms of our property management, we will work through it as quickly as we can. And as I say, if we'd started 20 years ago, perhaps, because this technology isn't new by any stretch of the imagination, we'd be perhaps in a better position. But there's a certain amount of catch-up being played. And I'm hoping that with pressure from this newly created position I find myself in, we can start accelerating some of this work.
Well, I mean, so you haven't mentioned, or you have mentioned ground source heat pumps.
Yep.
But you haven't mentioned us doing any. Now, it seems to me that these technologies, so, for instance, ground source heat pumps, are particularly appropriate for big buildings, for your area. And it strikes me, if we invest in these technologies now, not in 10 years' time, but if we invest in them now, we would have longer term, lower running costs. We'd have lower carbon emissions, and for large installations, in actual fact, you make money. It's estimated you can have a 12% return. So it seems, with those reasons, it seems almost like we're obliged to make these investments now, especially as we're in a climate emergency. I mean, why are we doing it?
That's a great question, and I happen to wholeheartedly agree. The simple answer, and I'll be very frank with you, is that there is a serious upfront cost implication. And whilst you're absolutely right, it does pay for itself over time, the span of time which it pays for itself is slightly longer, in some cases a lot longer, than the average political life cycle, shall we say. And what tends to happen is that it's very easy for politicians to get away with making the easy decision in terms of cost implications when there isn't the public pressure to factor in climate change and sustainability as much as we should do. And I think what we're seeing over the last few years, the last 10 really, is a growing public pressure to start factoring in climate change into decision making. And I hope that I can be a proponent for that here at Guildford Borough Council. And I feel confident that we are now starting to pay attention. You're absolutely right. On large sites and large, in sort of whether it's a single large building or a large number of buildings, it should almost be a no-brainer in terms of the cost effectiveness over a long span. So why isn't it already happening? Well, as I said, we're lagging behind where we should be, but that's not a good enough excuse. It's about how we accelerate this process. So this is absolutely something we're looking into.
I mean, even in the council offices, I happened to be there this morning, and a ground source heat pump would be ideal for post fitting. It's no more expensive to post fit, to drill boreholes now than it would be when you were building the building. So it really is.
Yep.
Anyway, I shan't go on about it because
I agree with you. Yes,
you were talking about. I think our current power supply is said not to be capable to handle the borough's current long-term growth plans. Is that right? And do GBC have plans for energy generation in our borough?
Yes, there is a significant amount of infrastructure work that needs to go into expanding our power infrastructure. The issue is that with the quantum of development that we're talking about and the long-term healthy growth of our borough, it can all be essentially boiled down to a growth in the energy demand. And currently, that's not a topic that's particularly heavily discussed. And there's something that I'm very much focusing in on as part of the CCIB, the Climate Change Innovation Board, we'll be looking at very strongly at the energy strategy going forward, because it's absolutely essential. If we don't get that right, and we don't ensure that there is a clean energy source for our expansion of our healthy growth, then we're shooting ourselves in the foot. We're just creating problems for the future. So this is a key area that needs some serious consideration. And again, there are some tough questions to be asked, which is that as the world and the UK specifically shifts towards renewable energy, how do we support that? How do we make sure we play our part? And how do we make sure that we are being realistic and in the way we plan for the future? So these are all critical considerations that we're now starting to focus in on.
Well, okay, so I know Surrey County Council in their climate plan absolutely emphasise, rightly or wrongly, they emphasise that it's down to every individual to do their part. And I would say, therefore, by implication, down to every council. So are there plans for a solar farm in the borough?
Well, I don't want to reveal my hand on that too prematurely, but yes, the short answer is that I'm looking for that opportunity because I think it is the right call. Obviously, Guildford is slightly constrained in its available land. 90% of our boroughs are greenbelt, and we saw what happened the last time there was any attempt to change that designation. Though I would argue a solar field is a slightly different case. But more generally, we're currently doing a study to determine the solar potential of every metre square of the entire borough, because we have a lot of urban land with rooftop spaces which could be used up for solar. What I'm hoping to generate is essentially a map that private landowners can access and say, hold on a minute, actually there's a potential here. So they could get involved, and we can use it for our own holdings of the 5,000 units that we currently control, but also for places like our offices and major car parks. So that piece of study would be very useful. But generally speaking, I do think solar is a very strong potential for the future. And I'm not just saying that because I worked in the field as an academic once upon a time. I might be slightly biased on that. But I'm not also discounting investment outside of this borough. As I say, I don't think we can look at Guildford solely as a bubble. So offshore wind, I think, is a great investment right now. For someone like the UK with an abundance of coastline, I think it's a great solution. But there are obviously certain roadblocks to that from central government rules about spending outside the borough. So there's lots of roadblocks. There's always roadblocks to this progress. It's about now tackling some of that and not shying away from the scale of the problem. That's the key. I think there's a propensity for any political institution to not want to touch slightly tricky problems, because if they can't be solved within a couple of years, then they're almost not worth solving in a way, which I completely disagree with. I think we need to take this on head on.
So, transport has a big impact on our. I think it's the biggest emitter of carbon emissions in our borough.
Not quite. It's not quite, but yes, it's the second largest. Yes. Okay. Energy takes the biggest slice of the pie. 50% is energy.
Okay. What's your broad strategy on carbon emissions from transport?
Well, that's a bit tricky. We talk about encouraging modal shift away from car usage and an uptake in public transport and other alternative means of transport like cycling and better pedestrianisation. But the reality is that has to be supported at the ground level. It's not simply good enough to say we want modal shift. You have to talk about how to make it happen. In this prime example, there's a lot of buzz about electric vehicles, which are fantastic. But you have to ask the question, how do you generate the electricity for those vehicles? So if you haven't decarbonized your electricity generation, you haven't actually solved the problem. You've just punted it to another tier. My argument would be that we need to look at this from a top-down approach as opposed to a bottom-up, which is let's not focus in on the low-hanging fruit and then the simple solutions, which are no-brainers. Let's approach it from the top, which is how do we tackle the two biggest factors, the energy and the transport? And I think the answer is a combination of sort of decarbonizing energy and for the transport coming up with creative solutions to make sure that it's an easier decision not to use your car. And that requires a lot of cooperation. That can't be a Guildford Borough only thing. As you mentioned, Surrey County Council have punted the problem a little bit down to us, but they have to be involved as the local, as the highways authority and various other things. We've got to come up with we've got to do something different is what I'm trying to say. If you want a different result, you have to do something different.
Yeah, I've got to ask this, Jan. You received some criticism when you backed the Surrey County Council's refusal to hold a car-free day in Guildford. The proposal was for one day only, or one day in a year, 364 days cars, one day no cars.
Yep.
And on a Sunday. Don't you think that we should be encouraging these initiatives to actually do something rather than nothing?
I completely agree, and I didn't shoot down the proposal. In fact, I'm really supportive of it, and I think I've already requested that we look into it as something to do next year, and potentially more than just one day. The issue is we've just had quite a few car-free days in Guildford Town Centre, and I've been involved in conversations about how to restart the town centre economy, and to give the shops that are seriously struggling right now a real boost. And it seemed to fly in the face of that to suggest that we just kick the cars out. It just didn't make sense now at the back of what the crisis we've faced. So my answer to that wasn't a shooting down of the idea, which I think is great. It was more the timing wasn't right. I desperately want people to come back into the town centre to try and keep the core of our town centre alive. There are so many businesses on the brink of going under that if I even any decision that even reduces foot traffic by a couple of percent wouldn't make sense right now, would be my argument. But that's not to take away from the general idea, which is I'm wholeheartedly in support of. And I think we should look to have it as a calendar standard, a standard part of our calendars in the future, that the car-free days in Guildford should be a norm, because I think it's one of the best ways to get people used to that, and to get them used to the idea of, you know what, I don't have to take my own car into the town. There's enough options to make this work. And once people get used to it, I think they'll start shifting. So yeah, I just want to clarify that. I'm not against the idea at all.
Okay. Well, you're not against it, but it's not happening. I mean,
it's not happening now.
Yeah.
I'm happy to commit to it down the line.
Yeah.
As I say, Guildford Town Centre, I don't know if you live in the town centres, but it had been very quiet the last couple of months. So, and I'm also obviously the lead member for air quality control, and you can really see it in the numbers. The difference is drastic, and on any of the high capacity routes. So in a way, this COVID crisis has really demonstrated what's possible. It just feels a bit odd to try and force that issue again right now.
Okay. So last question here now. So I've read that traffic counts are showing that traffic is already about 75% of the pre-lockdown position. It looks to me to be back to business as usual. You know, here we are with we have a climate emergency, but it's business as usual. You mentioned before you need to bring people with us. You know, it has to be. You can't. Well, can you force things on people? What can GBC, what can Guildford Borough Council be doing to help people make the radical change away from fossil fuels?
That is the magic question in a way. And if I had a comprehensive answer that was applicable, then I would have done it. So I'll tell you what I think is the direction to go. First of all, I think we can't demonize those who use vehicles. I mean, you know, it's an essential part. People who need to do school runs, or people who need to supply their little shop with goods. It's in every part of our lives. It's necessary. So these people aren't driving fossil fuel burning vehicles for the fun of it. I don't think, for the vast majority. It's part of their daily routine. And for a lot of people, their priority list is their families, their businesses and things. And we can't simply force those people to burden the shift, the cost of the shift and the difficulties of shifting away onto the average citizen. What we have to do as a borough council is make it work for the residents. Any modal shift that's going to happen has to be better than what we have now. It can't just be, well, you're not allowed to drive a car anymore, because that's just not good enough. That doesn't address the real issue. which is that people still need to live, people still need to earn a living, and they should still be able to enjoy the amenities of our town. So I think the way forward is find solutions, whether that's finding out better ways of integrating public transport into the town, or better, I mean, I'm a big proponent of neighborhood zones and making sure traffic flows is better managed, for example, to improve air quality in certain areas. The issue is that in terms of the authority, our ability to influence decision-making is fairly limited without other partners, whether it's Surrey County Council, Whitehall, central government, or just businesses. So I think my desire with the current work of the CCIB and this portfolio is to start, as I've already said, start building a team of people who can engage together and say, this is where we are, this is where we want to go. It's very easy to talk about the end goal of this almost utopia you want to live in, but until you know the path to take from where we are, it doesn't mean a lot. So I think for me, the priority is figure out what that roadmap looks like. And I'm not going to be sitting here and telling you what that roadmap is. I think it's for everyone to come together and work it out together. It's not going to be a purely Guildford Borough-led thing.
Okay, so last question.
Sure.
Honestly, so you sound committed, Jan.
Yep.
Are your partners in Surrey, in other local authorities, are they as committed as you?
Well, that's not for me to really answer, is it? But I think that this is becoming a key issue for everyone. There was a recent survey that we conducted internally for some other work, and we asked residents what their primary concerns was, and the overwhelming majority, I think it was something like 94%, put the environment right at the top. So public perception is shifting, and if I think that the one thing we can rely on a good democracy is that it reflects the values of its people. So I think the public pressure is mounting, and those who are getting in the way will be removed one way or another. Whether it's quick enough or not is another matter. I don't control that. But I'm finding that I have more allies now than I ever had before. I spent many years, as I say, in academia working on this, and I often screamed at screens and politicians saying, why are you not doing enough? And the reality is it's a reflection of us as a society, is that if we care enough and there is enough pressure, things start happening, and I think we're getting there.
Okay, Councillor Jan Harwood, thank you ever so much for talking to the Guildford Dragon News.
Always a pleasure. Thank you.